Have any of you ever been to Africa? I've never been there, but I would love to go there, in part to meet with and interact with the people, but also to see the natural areas and the wild animals. I love watching wild animals. In many parts of Africa, it's really dry, and so the animals, they'll gather at these things watering holes, and that's true in Kruger National Park in South Africa. Now, one animal you'll often find at those watering holes is the impala. Not the Chevy car, the animal impala. And notice the rump on those animals. If you look closely, do you see the M there on their rump? Now, I don't know if you know this, but that M stands for McDonald's. When we're hungry here in Potterville, we might go to McDonald's to grab something to eat. And when a lion is hungry in Africa, well, they go and find an impala. The impala is one of the most common prey animals in Africa, and the predators love them. They're tasty. They're the Big Mac of African animals. And most of what I just told you there was true, but not all of it. I'll let you figure out where I was messing with you. Now, the impala, which is really fast, is able to survive because of that speed. But the lions and the cheetah, the two predators, both love impala. And if impala is getting a drink at a watering hole, they also have to watch out because another animal that loves the impala is the crocodile. You see, the impala is at the bottom of the four-legged food chain in Africa, and, well, they face threats from the land and from the water, which helps to explain impala behavior, because if you were to watch them, well, they startle at every single little sound. Watch how the impala at this watering hole are constantly scanning, constantly watching. Oh, what was that? And then something more dramatic happens and boom, they scatter. We better go. And then they eventually, well, they'll come back to that watering hole cautiously. You see, impalas are incredibly anxious and nervous animals. And if you were to sit and to watch those impalas and how skittish they are, I think you'd find that they're a lot like us as human beings. You see, the problem is that many of us live with this underlying fear that something is going to get us. Now, for us, it's not so much animals, but maybe it's other people. It's just the other. And it puts us in this heightened state of awareness and caution. We are stressed and we are anxious and we are ready to run. And well, we have the same mechanism for survival built into us that the impala has. We call this a fight or flight mechanism. Either we're going to be ready to fight for our life or we're going to be ready to make a run for it. And we have this feeling that we need to protect ourselves because, well, somebody is out to get us. And today we're going to talk about fear of the other. We're continuing this series on living unafraid, living with courage and hope. And we have this fight or flight system built into us that's meant to protect us. Well, but sometimes our sensitivity is not quite accurate. There are times when we don't accurately discern a threat. Now, let me tell you this. We exaggerate fear. The vast majority, maybe 99% of the things we are afraid of, we don't really need to be afraid of. There are real threats and there are real things that we should be afraid of, but that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the fears that we wrestle with, the things that we spend time pondering about and worrying about and being afraid of, but we don't really need to be afraid of them. Sometimes the things that we learn to fear are things that we learned culturally. We may not even know exactly where we got these fears, but they're embedded within us, and they may have been taught to us by our parents or by our grandparents. And these fears could come from the news or from a movie or from something that we saw when we were kids. Now, let me give you an example for me. From my own experience. I grew up in the city of Grand Rapids, not that far from what you'd call the inner city of Grand Rapids. And from a young age, I learned that there were certain neighborhoods that I could go into. Those were neighborhoods that were predominantly white. And there were other neighborhoods that I should avoid. And those were neighborhoods that were predominantly black. And somehow I internalized that if I went into those other neighborhoods, well, something bad would happen to me. No, I don't even know what the bad thing really was or what I should be scared of those other neighborhoods. But maybe I thought I'd get beaten up or I'd get robbed or maybe even killed. And in truth, though, I didn't really know anything about those neighborhoods. I didn't know any of the people who lived in them, but I sensed that somehow I was supposed to be afraid of them. Now, in reflecting on my growing up in Grand Rapids, we didn't use any racial slurs in my house. We went to church and we did our best to love our neighbors as ourselves. We didn't consciously set out to be racist, but yet there was this fear baked into the whole thing. It was like an undercurrent that unless you got some perspective, you might not even know it was there. And here's the thing about where I grew up. I'm confident that if I were to get to know some of the African Americans who grew up in those neighborhoods that I learned to avoid, well, they would tell me that they grew up afraid of going to the neighborhood where I lived because they could get beat up or arrested or killed. And I would argue that that fear, well, that's way more justified than what I grew up with. But at its root, we share a common fear of the other. So here's a question for you to think of. What are some of the things you were somehow taught to be afraid of when you were young? Let's discuss that.